Hi everyone. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the assignment for writing project number one. Um, it's going to be a little while before you actually write writing project number one. The first assignment that you have is just to make a plan for how you plan to go about writing project number one. Okay, so we do this in stages. I don't just throw you in and say now you've got to write this project that's going to be pages long. Instead, I say let's start out first and just give me a plan for that. But in order to do the plan, you have to know what the assignment is. So let's talk about what the assignment is, and then in the next video, we'll talk about what the actual plan is supposed to look like. So writing project number one, I say here, the story's the lesson, how to date a brown girl, black girl, white girl, or halfie, and everyday use. So just those three stories, no other stories. Those stories all have conflicts that arise from characters who feel as if they or their culture and traditions are not being valued or respected by someone else. And so we can think about that in something like everyday use, where that main character they're going to have that conflict over the quilt, and a lot of that has to do with feeling as if certain cultures or traditions represented by that quilt are not going to be valued or respected by the other person. So, but that happens in all of these stories in some ways. So for major project number one, you'll need to write about any one of the above stories, so just one. That's important. You're not writing any kind of a comparison, contrast, nothing like that. You choose only one of these stories and discuss how the author uses symbols to communicate his or her ideas about this lack of respect. So there are a number of symbols in these stories, and you want to talk about how those symbols show us something about that lack of respect. You should have already started to do something like this with everyday use, and so if you choose to write about everyday use, you have a little bit of a head start on that. But of course, you don't have to write about everyday use. You can write about the lesson or how to date a brown girl if you like those other stories better. Um, you also must explore your personal connection to any of the characters' concerns about respect. Do you identify with any of them? If so, exactly how? If not, what exactly is different? What symbols from the story resonate with you, or what symbols from your own life resonate from the events in the stories? Resonate means that you can see some kind of a connection with those, right? So are there any symbols in the story that make real good sense to you? Is there some symbol, something that happened in your own life, a symbol from your own life, something that maybe you wrote about for the symbolism discussion board that might reveal something about what's going on in the story. So just I want you to think about your personal connection to that. Um, I say, of course, you might not be from the same cultural background as the characters, but you can be of a different background and as someone and still feel as if you understand where they are coming from. So some of you already wrote about, let's say, the flowers. You wrote about a personal connection to what Mayap is going through in the flowers. You may not be African American, most of you aren't, but you can still recognize that there's a connection there in how she's kind of losing her innocence. And so you can find some connection with the characters, even if you are not of the same background as they are. I say in here you must have a thesis that is more specific in the prompt. We'll be talking about what a thesis is. So, for example, if you're writing about the flowers, you of course cannot write about that story. I'm using an example. You cannot write about the flowers because you can only write about the lesson, how to date a brown girl, black girl, white girl, half in everyday use. So you cannot write about the flowers. I'm going to use it as an example because I don't want to give you a thesis. I don't want to give you an idea about what to write about. I'm just going to choose something that you definitely cannot write about, and you can see how it operates. So if you were writing about the flowers, you could not have a thesis that says, in the flowers, it makes sense to me when Alice Walker uses flowers as a symbol to show how Maya becomes less innocent because I've had similar experiences. I misspelled innocent there. She uses flowers. This thesis in the flowers, it makes sense to me when Alice Walker uses the flowers as a symbol to show how Maya becomes less innocent because I've had similar experiences. That's not a good thesis. I say this would not work as a thesis because it doesn't show a specific understanding of what happens in the story or make a specific statement about your own life. So your thesis needs to be somewhat specific, right? You need to kind of dig into the big ideas early on, and that's one of the biggest problems that students are going to have here is a lot of you feel like, I don't want to get specific early on, I'm going to wait till I get till later on in the essay. But I want to see some specifics right there in your thesis, because what happens is if you don't put them right there in the thesis, oftentimes you aren't going to put them anywhere else. So I want to see them right there in the thesis. So this is not a good thesis. I say, however, you could write, in the flowers, Alice Walker uses flowers as a symbol to show us that Mayap is becoming less innocent when she learns about the hatred towards African Americans and the brutalities that she and other African Americans might face in the future. All right, that's a lot more specific. It's not just that she's losing her innocence, right? She is losing her innocence because she is recognizing that hatred towards African Americans, as evidenced by the fact that some African Americans are going to be lynched, and she sees that she and other African Americans might face these brutalities in the future, right? I mean, that's one of the things you might think about. This person looks like me. Is that going to happen to me as well? So, or somebody in my family. This is a much more specific idea about what's going on, about what those symbols show, about this, not just in general. Well, the flowers show that she's losing her innocence. Innocence about what? Because we could lose our innocence about a lot of different things. And so this one has a very specific idea about what that lost innocence is. And you want to have something like that in your thesis. I then say, I also have had experiences that have made me realize that I am much less respected and so much less safe than I thought I was, right? And so this is the second part of your thesis, which talks about your experiences. It doesn't say, I've had similar experiences. It says that you have had experiences where you feel that you are much less respected and less safe than you thought you were. Again, that's much more specific and ties into the details of the story. And I say down here, realize that your thesis can consist of more than one sentence. So just keep that in mind here, that the thesis needs to be a lot more detailed than you might think. And so we're going to spend some time making sure that you've got a good thesis. That's one of the reasons why I have you do a writing plan first, because in that writing plan, I want you to develop a thesis. And we'll talk about how to get a good thesis. We'll work on that in your writing plan before you try to put one in your essay, because if you put a bad thesis in your actual essay, in your actual writing project, your writing project won't go as well because it doesn't have a good thesis. So that's what will be one of the things we'll be working on in the writing plan. I say, notice that the second thesis tells us the specific issues that Mayap became aware of. She learns about the hatred towards African Americans and the brutalities that she and other African Americans might face in the future, and also tells us exactly how the writer's experience relates to Mayap's, right? So those are details, right? Your thesis should do the same, right? You should have those kinds of details in your thesis. I say in here, one of the biggest challenges you will face in writing this assignment is balancing your discussion of the story and your personal experiences. This assignment is about both you and the story, so the reader should never feel like one is being discussed at the expense of the other. So you should feel like you may talk about the story and then talk about yourself, or talk about yourself and the story. However you choose to do that, there shouldn't be a sense like, look, this is all about the story and then here's 2 sentences about yourself, or this is all about yourself and then here's 2 sentences about the story. There should be kind of an even balance between the two. I say this project needs to be 3 pages long in an MLA format, and we're going to talk some videos and things next week about what MLA format is. We have a rubric here. Again, remember, a rubric is where I talk about how I'm going to mark this. I say this is not graded. You're going to get full credit for just turning in the assignment. But when you do a rough draft, I'm going to mark this and say, do you have a good thesis? Does your project have a clear thesis that addresses specifically what the symbols help us understand, how the characters don't feel valued, help us understand how the characters don't feel valued. The thesis also clearly addresses how the story connects to the student's personal experiences. So does your thesis do all that? And I'll give you a mark on there. And when you do your rough draft, you'll look after you finish your rough draft, you'll see the marks saying you got an unsatisfactory on this. Well, then we'll talk about how to get you up into the at least in the satisfactory or good category. What is it that you need to be able to change there for that? The project shows a clear understanding of how symbolic language can be used to express larger ideas, right? Did you do a good job with that? Again, for your rough draft, if you see that grade on your rough draft and it's down here, we want to talk about how we're going to get that better for the final draft. The project has an appropriate organizational structure. The thesis is supported by examples from the student's life as well as quotes from the story and a clear explanation about how those quotes relate back to the thesis. And the writing is clear, concise, and specific. Sentences are free of grammatical and mechanical errors. So again, you're going to be doing a rough draft. I'll mark all of these categories on there, see where you stand. On your final draft, hopefully you'll move up, and then part of your grade for your final draft will be how well did you move up, right? If on your final draft you're getting the same scores here as you did on your rough draft, I'm going to say, well, you didn't really do a lot of work here because we're ending up in the same place. And so keep that in mind, that's a component of how it is that I'm going to be kind of evaluating how well you do your work here. So that's the actual assignment for writing project number 1, and then in the next video we'll talk about the writing plan assignment.